Of course, it's easy to understand why people would react to the unfolding ecological crisis with a great deal of urgency. But I want to explain a couple of reasons why, counterintuitively, that might actually be a really bad place to respond from. First of all, urgency, I'm thinking of as this feeling that, we only have 2 years left, we only have 3 years left, we only have 4 years left. And that begs the question, left until what? Because already, right now, every single year, tens of millions of people are dying from a variety of causes related to the ecological crisis. So hunger, drought, extreme weather, and hundreds of species are going extinct every single year. Countless habitats are being lost. So this urgency, this idea that we have a short amount of time to act, normalizes the very real forms of harm that are already being felt, but they're being felt disproportionately by poor people, by racialized people, by indigenous people, by people outside of the global north, and by other forms of life. And obviously that's something that we don't want to normalize, but that the institutions in power do want to normalize, because those forms of harm are where they get a lot of their power. That kind of urgency, it misses out on the fact that it was urgent. I mean, if it ever could have been justified believing in these institutions of power, relying on the media to inform us, on scientists to, point out the truth, on government to take action to protect us, it was urgent in the 70s, it was urgent in the 80s. But of course, all of those institutions failed us in those different objectives of informing us or protecting us, because that is not the role of those institutions. The role of those institutions is to accumulate power for themselves and to exploit the rest of us. So that sense of urgency normalizes and naturalizes those institutions as well, as though they actually, are going to institute some kind of healthy transformation to take care of us in the next few years or in the next few decades. And that's related to how that urgency helps this reductionist approach that strips away all of the complexity of the ecological crisis, which is really a great many crises happening simultaneously in an interconnected way across ecological and social dimensions. From hunger and borders and pollution, habitat loss, to the warming of the climate. It reduces it to this very technocratic terrain where the only focus is climate change, and therefore pretty much the only focus is greenhouse gases. And so that's something that favors technocrats to measure greenhouse gases, to set goals on reducing carbon emissions. And that's not something that the rest of us can really participate in any active way. It's also completely absurd. It's an absurdly simplistic reduction, and that's not actually how this crisis is unfolding. And that's not the singular cause of this crisis. Of course, carbon emissions are important, but you cannot realistically look at carbon emissions without looking at capitalism, without looking at borders, without looking at habitat loss, without looking at industrialized agriculture. And the institutions in power are certainly not going to, question or get rid of capitalist forms of production. They will simply put capitalist infrastructures and institutions to work producing different commodities, but in the same general ways that are so exploitative and so destructive. And finally, this sense of urgency is really, really dangerous. That reductionism, it strips away all of these concerns, for example, of colonialism, of racism, and how that's related to the ecological crisis. And it also allows for authoritarianism to come into these movements that are responding to the ecological crisis. And these are movements that have accomplished a great deal, spreading knowledge, feeding people, housing people, saving lives on the front lines, saving habitats, stopping important infrastructure projects, and by and large these movements have been anti-authoritarian, horizontal, autonomous, creating solidarity within one another without centralizing structures. But now you have all of these academics and all of these politicians who have not put their lives on the line, who do not participate in a deep and meaningful way in these movements, who want to be able to lead these movements, either to gain their own power or to support these sort of false solutions that will increase the power of dominant institutions. And when people feel that there's a lot of urgency, that there's a ticking clock, they'll get desperate. And so if someone comes along promising to be able to wave a magic wand and solve the problem, and right now that magic wand is this idea of state intervention, that massive state intervention and new policies like the Green New Deal will solve this crisis, then people will go against their better judgment and they'll surrender their own experience in order to follow these leaders. And that kind of authoritarianism in environmental movements is very dangerous because it will decrease the effectiveness of those movements. It will definitely decenter our own needs. It will make it harder for us to use these movements to protect ourselves from these very real crises. And it also opens the door to eco-fascism. And even if it doesn't get as far as eco-fascism, still a lot of these authoritarian would-be movement leaders in Extinction Rebellion, in the climate movement, a lot of these academics, they are crypto-racists. They are people who don't want us to pay as much attention to questions of ongoing colonialism, to questions of racism. Basically, they want to put their power first ahead of all of these other concerns that we need to continuously be emphasizing and driving home.
So if climate change, if the ecological crisis are not urgent, if they're already here, if they're already a disaster, and one that's going to be with us for a very long time, then what is the most important thing? The most important thing is not to let ourselves be fooled with some kind of band-aid solution or some kind of quick fix from above. The most important thing is to make the deep and long-lasting changes that will allow us to heal the damage that's being done over the next centuries, that will allow us to build up societies that exist in reciprocal relationships with all other living beings and with the rest of the planet, instead of continuing this exploitative relationship, instead of continuing capitalism. And so coming up with the real long-term, radical, total solutions, total changes, total transformations to how we organize, how we live, and how we relate with one another and with the rest of the natural world. A part of that means revolution. A part of that means tearing down all of the structures, both physical and social, that are responsible for ecocide. It means stopping those who derive their power and their wealth from destroying the planet, from destroying the possibility of dignified life and survival. From like the tech billionaires to government leaders to military leaders, stopping them, all of them, by any means necessary. And it also means taking care of one another so that we can survive this crisis, so that we can survive this catastrophe. Taking care of one another in the best way possible. Our neighbors, our friends, other living beings that we're in relationship with, that allow us to feed ourselves and clothe ourselves and house ourselves, and have healthcare and have healthy lives, basically to take care of all of those ecological relationships.